Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that's kind of your personal shortcut through all the information overload out there. In our world today, it's just so easy to feel completely swamped, right? Wondering, how do you sort out what's real knowledge from just speculation or maybe half-truths? And that's exactly why we're here. Our mission today is to give you a sort of custom-tailored journey, going through some really profound sources, pulling out those essential bits of insight. Today, we're diving into the Satsantrabhas. These are six, well, sometimes people say seven foundational philosophical texts. They were written by a really brilliant 16th century scholar, Srila Jiva Goswami. Think of it like a GPS for navigating spiritual reality. It's designed to cut through all that confusion and misinformation.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're mainly drawing from excerpts of a modern translation and commentary of the Tattvasandarbha. That's the very first book in this incredible series. And, this isn't just about digging up dusty old texts. It's about timeless wisdom, really, and how these ideas can directly impact your own quest for understanding. What's really fascinating is how these texts, right from the start, lay down the groundwork for what we can even consider valid knowledge.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that right away, because I think this hits close to home for, well, all of us. The Tattvasandarbha jumps right into this core human problem, our inherent fallibility. It points out these four fundamental defects that, as ordinary people, we all share. Can you maybe walk us through those and give us a sense of why they're so important to grasp first?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's foundational. The first one is delusion, or Brahma. And this isn't just like seeing a mirage. It's deeper. It's mistaking the temporary for the permanent, or maybe most fundamentally, identifying this ever-changing body as our true, unchanging self. Yeah. It's a really basic misunderstanding that shapes so much, often without us even realizing it. It basically means we're sort of built to misperceive reality sometimes.
Right. I can definitely see that. So maybe stop beating ourselves up so much for making mistakes, huh? It's just part of being human. What's next on the list?
Well, closely related is pramada. That's the tendency to simply make mistakes, which you're prone to error. It's, you could almost say, part of our operating system.
Okay.
Then third, there's vipralipsa, the cheating propensity. Now, this isn't always about like malicious deception. It's more our inherent tendency to deceive ourselves or others, maybe subtly, often to protect our ego or our, flawed views. And finally, maybe the most obvious one is karanapatava. This just means imperfect senses. Our senses are limited, right? They can be fooled by illusions. They don't see everything completely. They're like, limited tools.
Okay, so putting that all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, who's trying to figure out what's ultimately true? If we're all dealing with delusion, errors, self-deception, and these imperfect senses, how can we really trust our own direct perception, or even our logic, our anumana, especially when we're trying to grasp something huge, like inconceivable spiritual reality? Our sources really hammer this point home. Because of these four defects, the usual ways we think we know things, just seeing pratyaksha or using pure logic, or even relying on tradition, I'd here, they just aren't foolproof, especially not for things beyond our normal experience.
Yeah, and that raises this huge question, doesn't it? If our normal tools for knowing are flawed, particularly for understanding something transcendental, well, what is a reliable source? Even the Vedanta Sutra itself says something like, reason has no sure basis when it comes to ultimate reality. Logic, when it's just based on our flawed human perception and intellects, it can always be revised. It's built on shaky ground, like building a house on sand.
It really sounds like we might be stuck then. But this is where Jiva Goswami introduces something, well, really game-changing. He puts forward sabda, or revealed knowledge, as the only perfect means to know transcendental reality. That's a pretty bold claim, isn't it? Especially today, when everyone values personal experience or scientific proof so highly. How does he justify saying it's the only way?
Well, he clarifies sabda. He defines it as meaningful, articulate sound spoken or written by an aptapurusa. An aptapurusa is basically a trustworthy, authoritative person. But the really crucial distinction he makes is between purusya sabda, that's just mundane language, which comes from flawed humans, so it's not always reliable, and apurusya sabda. Apurusya sabda is revealed knowledge. It comes from a superhuman source, so it's completely free from those four defects we talked about. Okay. Because it's not made by a flawed human, it can't carry those flaws. Simple as that, really.
So it's literally knowledge that goes beyond human limits. And what counts as apurusya sabda?
This is really the foundation. The assertion is that the Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva are apurusya sabda. They're described as beginningless, eternal, not written by any mortal being. The understanding is they manifested from the Supreme Lord to Lord Brahma right at the dawn of creation. This is the absolute bedrock of Jiva Goswami's whole system of knowledge, his epistemology. This is the infallible source, like a perfect divine blueprint for reality.
Wow. An infallible source of knowledge. That's
Sure.
that's a huge claim. But okay, here's where it gets a bit tricky in practice, right? If these Vedas are the ultimate authority, why aren't we all just, studying them day and night? Our sources bring up some really interesting practical hurdles.
Right. If you actually try to study the Vedas in their entirety today, you hit some big problems. For one thing, complete, authenticated texts aren't always easy to find in their original form. And even if you do find them, you run into the issue of, often contradictory interpretations from different scholars and different schools of thought. It can feel like trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces and like 5 different instruction manuals telling you different things.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then there's the language itself. I've heard it's incredibly complex.
Exactly. That's maybe the real kicker for actually studying them practically. Vedic Sanskrit is incredibly nuanced. It uses 3 specific tone accents: Udatta, Svarita, and Anudatta. And if you get those wrong, even slightly, you can completely change the meaning of a word or a whole mantra. Our sources give this amazing example, the story of the Vitra demon. Apparently, a wrong accent in a crucial mantra led to the exact opposite result of what was intended.
Wow.
A tiny mispronunciation could literally flip the meaning. Imagine trying to master that without a perfect teacher in a living tradition. It's tough.
Okay, so you've got this incredibly powerful, infallible source, but it's really hard to access and even harder to interpret correctly on your own. So what's the workaround? What's the solution here? Jiva Goswami, being the brilliant scholar he was, proposes an accessible alternative.
Right.
The Itihasas and Puranas, these are sometimes called the 5th Veda.
Yes, and what's truly remarkable is why they're considered easier to understand. They're mostly written in Laukika Sanskrit.
Yeah.
It's more like a common spoken language, not the ancient tonal Vedic Sanskrit. Plus, they explain really deep, esoteric Vedic ideas through stories, through narratives. That makes them incredibly accessible, like parables almost. And crucially, reading them isn't restricted just to the Dvijas, the twice-born Vedic initiates. Anyone can read them. Our sources even mention Sutta Goswami, who wasn't a twice-born Brahmana, as the original speaker of some major Puranas.
That's huge.
It really democratizes access to this knowledge.
That feels like a monumental shift. I mean, just imagine being able to access profound spiritual wisdom without needing to become an expert in an ancient, incredibly complex language first. And what's really amazing, as our sources point out, is that even though they're easier to grasp and more accessible, these Itihasas and Puranas convey the exact same conclusions as the original Vedas. They come from the same divine source, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So they're equally free from those human defects. They're perfect Sabda Pramana.
Absolutely. And central to this whole idea of accessible wisdom is the figure of Srila Vyasadeva. He's key. He's described as the literary incarnation of God. Think about that. He's the one who condensed the existing Vedas into the form we have them today. And then, maybe even more importantly for accessibility, he compiled the Puranas. He drew from unused Vedic verses and the very essence of Vedic knowledge. This act itself confirms their eternal and aparusya divine nature. It shows they aren't just human stories.
So if you can't easily study the original complex Vedas, you can turn to the Itihasas and Puranas and get the same essential truth. It's like that powerful analogy our source uses. Studying these texts is like chanting Lord Krishna's holy name. It's called the choicest fruit of the Vedas, purely Vedic in essence, but accessible to everyone. It's the core wisdom made available for all.
Which naturally brings us to sort of the crown jewel of these accessible scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's consistently praised, glorified as the ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic knowledge, and even, quite boldly, called the representative of God in book form. There's this audacious claim made about it: if one knows the Bhagavatam, nothing remains to be known.
Wow.
And that's not just, flowery language. It's understood to mean it truly elevates the sincere student to direct realization of the absolute truth.
That's a huge promise. And our sources mention its purifying effect, freeing you from fear, illusion, lamentation, elevating you to direct realization. It's apparently so potent that it can even make an illiterate person learn just by hearing it regularly from a qualified speaker. But how do we know this isn't just one Purana among many equally good ones? What makes the Bhagavatam stand out so much?
That's a really important question, yeah. Traditionally, the Puranas are classified according to the 3 modes of material nature: Sattvik, goodness; Rajasic, passion; and Tamasic, ignorance. Texts like the Matsya Purana and Padma Purana explain this. And the understanding is that real knowledge, true understanding, only really develops from the mode of goodness, sattva.
Okay.
So Srimad Bhagavatam is declared Parama Savika. That means it's a manifestation of pure goodness without any material pinch. And the reason is because it primarily glorifies Lord Hari or Krishna, and it's supremely pleasing to him. Other Puranas might glorify different deities, often for material benefits, and so they might operate in the lower modes, like passion or ignorance.
So is there a clear way to tell if a Purana is sattvic, like a litmus test?
Yes, our sources give a very clear criterion. A sattvic Purana typically starts with a self-realized speaker answering really deep questions from an intelligent inquirer. Questions about, ultimate reality, the supreme form of religion, or how one should prepare for death. And crucially, the answers given have to be specific and unambiguous. No room for misinterpretation or, vague, wishy-washy philosophy.
Oh, okay.
That's how you know you've found a reliable guide in that category.
That sounds like a true guide indeed. And this focus on Krishna and pure goodness connects directly to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings, doesn't it?
Precisely. Srimad Bhagavatam champions prema, pure love of Krishna, as the ultimate goal. Especially spontaneous devotional service, where devotion just flows naturally from the heart. This was absolutely central to Lord Chaitanya's message, and it was the understanding shared by his main followers, the 6 Goswamis, including Jiva Goswami. And it's quite interesting, actually, Srila Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, he specifically prepared for his mission to bring Krishna consciousness to the West by intensely studying these very Satsandarbhas in Jiva Goswami's own temple in Vrindavan. Wow. It shows that direct lineage, that connection of knowledge.
That's a fascinating historical link. Okay, so if Srimad Bhagavatam is the ultimate authority, what does it actually teach? Our sources explain that Srila Vyasadeva, remember him, the compiler, even after compiling all the Vedas, he felt this deep sense of dissatisfaction. His spiritual master, Narada Muni, then told him basically, you need to systematically explain pure devotional service. And this led Vyasadeva into this profound trance where he directly perceived the nature of ultimate reality. Jiva Goswami's Satsandarbhas then take this realization and meticulously organize it into this powerful threefold framework like a spiritual GPS. It's Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojana. It's like an ancient but incredibly comprehensive guide.
Right. Let's start with Sambandha. This basically asks, what is reality? What's the subject? The Satsandarbhas clearly established Lord Sri Krishna as the supreme subject, the Visaya. He is the non-dual absolute reality. Now that word non-dual, advayam, in Vedic philosophy, doesn't mean nothing else exists at all. Rather, it means the absolute is completely self-existent, totally independent, grounded in itself. And everything else that exists only because it's supported by him. Nothing else exists independently.
Okay. So this is where it directly pushes back against certain monistic ideas, right? Like the Mayavada philosophy, the one that says ultimate reality is just a formless, non-dual Brahman, and all the variety we see is just an illusion, a kind of Maya. Can you break down Jiva Goswami's refutation of that a bit more for us?
Sure. Our sources highlight how Jiva Goswami logically refutes the common analogies used to explain how a formless Brahman could somehow appear divided or manifest variety. Things like the sky in a pot analogy, Parichetavada. The idea is the sky seems divided by different pots, but it's still one sky.
Right.
Or the sun's reflection in water, Pratibambhavada. Jiva Goswami argues pretty fundamentally that an unlimited, partless, purely conscious entity like Brahman cannot actually be limited or divided or reflected in these physical ways. It's inherently perfect and indivisible. So those analogies which work for physical things just don't hold up when you apply them to the unlimited absolute.
Yeah.
They impose limitations where there are none.
That makes sense. It's about the fundamental nature of the absolute itself. So what's the alternative conclusion, the Vaishnava one championed by Lord Chaitanya?
The Vaishnava conclusion is captured in the phrase asintya bhedabda. It translates roughly to inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference.
Okay, inconceivable.
Yeah, it's key. Think of sparks coming from a big bonfire. The sparks are clearly from the fire, right? They share the same quality, fiery heat and light. But they're also obviously distinct little sparks flying off on their own for a moment. That's the core idea. The Lord and his energies, including us individual souls, are simultaneously one in quality, in essence, yet distinctly different in terms of quantity, identity, and function. This concept, this analogy, beautifully resolves those apparent contradictions you find in different Vedic texts, showing how the divine can be both the source of everything and yet distinct from it.
Okay, that's Sambandha, understanding the reality. What about Abhidheya? That's the process how to get there.
Right. Vyasadeva, in that deep trance, realized that Bhakti Yoga, which means devotional service, is the direct and most effective process. It's the way to mitigate the miseries that conditioned souls experience and ultimately to achieve pure love of God. More specifically, the practical path is sadhana bhakti. This is regulated devotional service, characterized by specific practices like hearing, sravanam, and chanting, kirtanam. It relies on getting proper instruction and guidance.
And what's the relevance for you, our listeners, sitting here right now?
Well, our sources state very clearly that simply hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, engaging with this knowledge, is itself a form of sadhana bhakti.
Right.
It's considered a direct path towards developing that pure love of God. So what we're doing right now, this deep dive, exploring these texts, it's actually part of that very process. It's the philosophy in action.
Which naturally leads us to the third part, prayojana. The goal, what's the ultimate purpose?
This is prema, pure, unadulterated love of God. It's described as the fifth purusartha. That means it actually transcends the traditional four goals of human life.
Right, those are dharma, duty, religion, artha, wealth, kama, pleasure, and moksha, liberation.
Exactly. Prema goes beyond even liberation from the material cycle.
And this was really Lord Caitanya's revolutionary contribution, wasn't it? Pushing beyond just wanting to get out of the material world towards wanting an active, loving relationship with Krishna.
Precisely. And our sources explain that achieving this highest gain doesn't mean you suddenly hate the material world. Instead, you learn to appreciate it as the Lord's creation, His energy, and you use everything in His service. When that happens, all good qualities naturally blossom within you, and you experience a kind of true happiness that's far beyond fleeting material pleasures.
Now, to really get this whole picture, we also need to understand the you in this equation, the nature of the jiva, the individual soul. What is it, fundamentally?
The jiva, the individual soul, it's described as eternal. It was never born, it never dies, it doesn't grow or decay like the body. It is essentially pure consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's completely distinct from the material body and the mind.
Okay, but how do we actually know that? I mean, it's not something we can point to or measure.
Yeah. Right. Our sources use a really elegant argument.
Mm-hmm.
The perceiver versus the perceived.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. Your body, your thoughts, your feelings, these are all things you perceive. You are aware of them. Since they're objects of your perception, you, the perceiver, the soul, must be different from them. Consider the three states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and deep dreamless sleep. In deep sleep, you completely detach from your body, your mind, your senses. When you wake up, you remember feeling rested, maybe experiencing a kind of pure bliss, even though you weren't aware of anything external.
Yeah, that feeling of just peace.
Exactly. That experience demonstrates the soul's constant, unchanging nature, its distinction from the ever-changing body and mind. The soul is also self-aware. Like the sun reveals itself by its own light, the soul is inherently conscious of its own existence.
So it's pure consciousness, eternal, but it's not the supreme consciousness, not God himself. What's the relationship there?
That's a crucial distinction, yes. The jiva is described as a marginal energy, tatastha sakti, of the Supreme Lord. It possesses the Lord's characteristics, consciousness, eternity, bliss, but only in a minute degree. Like a tiny drop of ocean water has the same chemical quality, salty, as the vast ocean, but it's obviously not the ocean itself.
Okay, a qualitative oneness, but quantitative difference.
Precisely. And like that drop, the jiva is always dependent on the Lord. It's never the ultimate asraya, the ultimate shelter or source in the primary sense. The Lord is the shelter for himself and for everyone else. The jiva finds its true, ultimate shelter in the Lord.
This whole framework, Sambandha, Apita, Prayojana, and understanding the jiva really helps us appreciate the grand narrative of the Srimad Bhagavatam then. It's traditionally understood through 10 main topics, right? These are like the key themes or plot points that run through the whole text.
Exactly. They act as the organizing principles for the entire work. They are Sarga, the initial primary creation by the Lord; Visarga, the secondary creation, often carried out by Brahma and other empowered beings; Stanam, or Virti, the maintenance and sustenance of the universe and its inhabitants; Posanam, or Raksa, the Lord's protection and mercy toward his devotees; Manvantarani, the reigns of the various Manus, the progenitors of mankind in different eras; Vamsa, the great genealogies, the dynasties of kings and sages; Vamsanukarita, the detailed histories and activities of the prominent figures in those dynasties; Samsa, the dissolution or annihilation of the cosmos; Hetu, the underlying cause or motivation for creation, existence, and dissolution, often linked to the living entity's desires and karma; and finally, number 10, Apasaraya.
Apasaraya, the supreme shelter. So what's the ultimate focus here? Is it just a collection of these 10 topics, or is there a unifying thread?
This is where Jiva Goswami offers such a key insight, really the profound takeaway. He explains that the first 9 topics all ultimately serve one purpose: to illuminate the 10th topic, Apasaraya. And that Apasaraya, the supreme shelter, is Lord Sri Krishna himself. It's like climbing a grand staircase where each step, creation, sustenance, the stories of kings, annihilations, they all lead you upwards, finally reaching the rooftop. And that rooftop, the ultimate point, is Krishna. It demonstrates that the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, from beginning to end, is systematically focused on the supreme personality of Godhead, Krishna, and understanding his nature, his energies, his pastimes, his relationship with everything. It all funnels towards him.
Okay, that provides incredible clarity on the Bhagavatam's structure and purpose. But this focus on Krishna and his pastimes leads us to a pretty significant point of discussion, even contention, mentioned in our sources. It's the controversy surrounding the authenticity of certain chapters, specifically chapters 12 to 14 of the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Apparently, some scholars, like Giridhar Lal mentioned in the commentary, considered these to be later additions, interpolations. What are the typical objections raised by critics?
Yeah, it's an interesting historical debate. The objections usually revolve around a few key areas. One is perceived narrative inconsistencies, or maybe verse repetitions that seem out of place to some readers. Another big one is the idea that demons killed directly by Krishna, like Aghasura in these chapters, attain liberation. Some critics argue this contradicts certain traditional views, maybe from other schools of thought. Then there's a point about Kamsa. Apparently, he seems to witness Aghasura's killing in one place, but then Narada narrates it to him later. Critics see that as a potential narrative flaw. Also, the idea of the Lord himself appearing surprised or bewildered by events like the cowherd boys accidentally wandering into Aghasura's mouth, or the calves and boys being stolen later on. Some argue this contradicts Krishna's omniscience and omnipotence, his unfailing will.
Right, how could God be bewildered?
Exactly. And finally, there are concerns raised about rasabhasa, which means an improper mixing of devotional mellows or relationships. This usually comes up regarding Krishna's pastimes with the gopis, specifically questions about their age relative to his, or the appropriateness of them nursing him in certain contexts.
Okay, that's quite a list of concerns. So how do Jiva Goswami and the commentators associated with this lineage respond? What's the core defense of these chapters?
Well, first off, Jiva Goswami himself explicitly accepted these chapters as fully authentic. He even stated the Bhagavatam has exactly 335 chapters, including these. He directly addressed and defended them against claims of interpolation in his own detailed commentaries. So his stance is unambiguous. Now, regarding Krishna appearing bewildered, the explanation given is actually quite profound. Krishna, being Satya Sankalpa, the one whose will is always fulfilled, is never truly bewildered or surprised by anything. His apparent bewilderment, or moments of apparent fear even, are explained as a function of his internal potency called Yogamaya. It's a deliberate divine arrangement that allows him to manifest these incredibly sweet human-like pastimes, or lilas. In these lilas, his overwhelming divine opulence, his asavaya, is temporarily covered or veiled.
Why would he do that?
To make his interactions more intimate or relatable for his devotees. It deepens their loving relationship with him when he acts like one of them. Our sources point out similar instances of Krishna's apparent fear or surprise in other parts of the Bhagavatam too, and they're always explained this way. It's divine play, Lila, not actual ignorance or limitation.
Okay, so it's not a flaw in the narrative, but a feature of the divine personality designed for loving exchange. What about the demons getting liberation? That sounds pretty specific.
Yes, and the response is quite direct. Our sources confirm that the Srimad Bhagavatam as a whole does consistently describe demons who are killed directly by Krishna as attaining liberation, or at least a very high spiritual destination. This is actually a standard Vaishnava theological principle, rooted in the idea of the purifying potency of direct contact with the Lord, even in an antagonistic way. So it's not seen as a contradiction within the Bhagavatam's own framework.
Okay. And Kamsa hearing about Aghasura twice.
The explanation there is usually that Kamsa generally knew Krishna was out there defeating his demonic agents. He was getting reports. Narada's later narration wasn't necessarily brand new information about the event itself, but served a specific purpose, to really heighten Kamsa's fear and animosity, to psychologically instigate him further against Krishna. It's about the impact on Kamsa, not just conveying raw data. Got it.
And the Rasapasa concerns, particularly about the gopis, those can feel tricky for modern sensibilities.
They can, and they are addressed carefully. The rebuttals often clarify, for instance, that the specific gopis who danced with Krishna in the famous Rasa Leela were generally young contemporaries, different from the elder gopis like Mother Yashoda's friends, who sometimes expressed maternal affection, even nursing him.
Ah, different groups.
Yes. And the point about elderly gopis nursing him is explained by pointing out that phenomena like milk flow can actually occur due to intense, overwhelming love and affection, even outside the normal biological context. An example cited is Dhruva Maharaja's mother experiencing this due to intense maternal love. And fundamentally, the argument comes back to Krishna's asintya nature, his inconceivable qualities and powers. He doesn't have to conform strictly to ordinary human limitations or social norms in his divine play. They also address specific word choices, like the term angana. Critics might say it only means young woman, implying impropriety. But the defense points out it could also simply mean woman with beautiful limbs, and could certainly apply to someone like Mother Yasoda expressing affection.
Are there any external proofs cited, like other texts from around that time that support these chapters being authentic?
Yes, actually. Our sources mention other significant respected texts. For example, Narayana Bhatta's 16th century work, the Narayanyam, which is a highly revered poetic summary of the Bhagavatam, explicitly includes the pastimes described in these very chapters. And interestingly, even Vallabhacharya, another major Vaishnava leader whose followers later sometimes raised criticisms, Vallabhacharya himself wrote commentaries that directly reference events from these so-called controversial pastimes, suggesting he accepted them in his time.
So there's corroborating evidence from other traditions and scholars of that era.
Exactly. It strengthens the case for their authenticity.
So wrapping up this point, what's the final argument for upholding the integrity of the Bhagavatam as we have it, including these chapters?
Well, the bottom line from Jiva Goswami and subsequent commentators is that there's really no substantial verifiable proof of who supposedly interpolated these chapters or when it might have happened. It remains speculative. Often, labeling parts of a sacred text as spurious can just be a convenient way to dismiss teachings or events that seem challenging or maybe just incomprehensible from our limited human viewpoint. And there's a strong devotional sentiment involved too. Srimad Bhagavatam is considered non-different from Krishna himself, so rejecting parts of it is likened to, well, causing harm to the Lord in his book form. Especially since the 10th canto, which contains all these intimate pastimes, is metaphorically described as Krishna's smiling face. You wouldn't want to disfigure that face, right? It emphasizes a deep reverence for the text as a complete, unified divine revelation.
That's a very powerful perspective and a comprehensive defense of the text's integrity.
Wow, we have certainly covered a huge amount of ground today.
Yeah.
Just to recap for everyone listening, this deep dive into the Tattva Sandarbha, the first of the Sat Sandarbhas, has really laid out some absolutely core teachings. Srimad Bhagavatam stands as the ultimate, most reliable scriptural authority. Lord Sri Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, the ultimate reality. Devotional service, Bhakti Yoga, is the direct process for understanding Him and reality. And pure, unalloyed love of Godhead, Prema, is the supreme goal of all life.
Yeah, and understanding these foundational principles really gives you, the listener, a powerful framework, a kind of internal GPS, like you said at the beginning. It helps navigate life's deepest questions, find genuine meaning, find real peace, and cut through so much of the confusion that just comes from relying only on our own flawed human perception and reasoning. It's actually a very practical and, I think, empowering philosophy, even for dealing with the complexities of our modern world. Indeed it is. We definitely encourage you, our listeners, to continue your own journey of knowledge, maybe exploring these profound concepts further on your own. And just as a final thought to leave you with, something to maybe ponder, if, as these texts claim, knowledge about the absolute truth truly has the power to free us from all fear, illusion, and lamentation, what would it genuinely mean for your life to wholeheartedly pursue this knowledge? You know, like the great Vyasadeva did when he finally found satisfaction. How might that kind of pursuit radically transform your own reality?